All right. Can you hear me? Yes? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, shalom. Hi.
Hello.
Nice to see all of you. Back to the Heart Sutra. Okay. And as usual, let's start with the prayers. Well, let's start with generating the right kind of motivation. So, of course, to take a moment. Oh, I forgot the breathing meditation. Never mind now. I started. So, let's just start. So, to take a moment to remember why we're doing this, why we get together here every Sunday, even if most of the time we may work for our own benefit, but this time is dedicated for the benefit of all sentient beings. So to think that may this become a cause for our own transformation, and that we generate wisdom and compassion, and of course the aspiration to become enlightened for the benefit of all sentient beings, so that we eventually attain the fully awakened state of a Buddha, and thereby be of greatest benefit to all sentient beings. So, with this motivation, let's take a moment to just set our mind in that way. And again, with that motivation, let's first take refuge. So, to turn our mind towards the Dharma, and of course, generate bodhicitta. And thereafter, having generated the wish to become enlightened through the four immeasurables, to put into practice the mind of enlightenment. Okay. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits of practicing generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits of practicing generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits of practicing generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. And then the four immeasurables. And as before, I'll take a short break between each line, giving you the opportunity to reflect on the meaning of those words. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. Okay, great. Now for today, I've discussed emptiness to a great degree. Well, we could spend more time on it, but of course we need to also address other issues. So we'll get back to it. but I'd like to spend also a little bit of time on now the method aspect, like compassion, how this is set forth here, how also the method, the path is set forth, and say a little bit about that. This is usually explained in the context of grounds and path, but already that word, those terms scare a lot of people because they feel it's very technical, very hard to understand. And of course, in great detail, it may be difficult, but actually it's not that hard. But to get more into it, compassion, etc., one thing that comes to mind, of course, before we can really effectively practice, that is, generate love, compassion, and here I'm talking about unconditional love and compassion directed towards indiscriminately other sentient beings, all sentient beings, if possible, is so important to get to know our own mind better. So to understand when we say we have a mind and a body, in the same way as this body is not just some unitary, solid, partless entity, but it's made of so many different aspects and refers to a body when we are rested, a body when we're tired, a body after we did some sports, a body that got burned when we were at the beach, etc. So in the same way, our mind is always different. It's always changing all the time. And so to not just think, oh, my mind is present, my mind is here, but to become aware what mind is there, which mind is present. So if you take an analogy that may be helpful, if you look at a crowd of people, you're surrounded by a crowd of people. First of all, you don't identify with this crowd of people. You're none of those people. You don't identify with them. And initially, it's just people. It's you can't really differentiate between them. But then, without judging, you start looking at these different people. Some may have helpful attitudes, maybe kind, maybe good for you, basically. So you seek their company. And then there are others that harm you, that are very negative at their approach, harmful, etc. So those you try to avoid. And I guess you could do the same really with your own mind. I mean, it works in a similar way. You become aware it's not just your mind is not just a single unitary entity that doesn't have different types of awareness. Oh, there's so many different kinds of mind. In fact, the scriptures, they talk about 84,000, but of course, that's just a high number. It's probably more than that. So many different types of consciousness. And of course, it's helpful to learn about the types of mind to then be able to identify them based on our own mind. I think I've mentioned that before. So that's why we learn about them first, in order then to internalize what we've learned and get to know these types of mind within us. So again, mindfulness is extremely important. I mean, it isn't mentioned much in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. In other traditions, there's a lot more emphasis on it, and that shows again that according to Tibetan Buddhism, the Pali tradition is the basis. So we really should have some knowledge of the Pali tradition, and nowadays we have access to it, and learn, of course, about mindfulness as it's presented in that tradition, and apply it. Because without mindfulness, no meditation, whether it's in the Tibetan, in the Nalanda tradition, or other traditions, is possible. So this reminder again and again, whatever you do all day long, train yourself in mindfulness, in, for instance, watching your own mind. Recognize what types of mind harm me, just like with people. Which types benefit me? So without judging, without identifying, just as you are none of those people, so you're none of those minds, you just have different minds. So different awarenesses arise. And oftentimes what may happen when you get angry and there's anger and you notice and the anger goes on, then there's anger towards yourself, not just towards the other person you were angry with, then there's anger towards yourself. And it's just tiring. It's so exhausting to have these afflictive emotions, especially resentment, anger, hatred. But also the other ones are very tiring. So in that way, therefore, if you get to know them and you get to see how they disrupt your mind, how some of these states of mind, such as compassion and love, when they're there, they calm you, they make you happy, your worries kind of subside. Um, while the negative ones, of course, and negative ones here need to be differentiated. Undesirable ones versus negative ones. They're undesirable ones, but they're not necessarily negative. They're not necessarily harmful. For instance, when we're grieving, okay, the basis of grief is definitely to a certain degree attachment, but we can't be unrealistic about just totally removing our attachment right away. But the grief itself, when it's there, to not suppress it, to allow for it to rise again and again until it slowly grows weaker. So, grief, for instance. Also, fear is not necessarily something negative. A kind of fear that's not debilitating, a kind of fear, for instance, fear of suffering if you harm another person, that kind of fear. Okay, I don't want to suffer, so I'm not going to harm anyone else. That's a healthy kind. I don't want to harm myself, so therefore I'm not harming others. Or fear of the suffering of others. That's even better. I don't want the sentient beings to suffer, so I'm not going to contribute to their problems. So that kind of fear or kind of a worry, it's not like this panic and kind of anxiety kind of, no, it's just this positive type of fear that, of course, eventually it'll go away, but it may be helpful. And we say, of course, when we take refuge, when we entrust ourselves in Buddhist psychology as a means to work with our problems, one of the causes is a kind of fear of the negative states of mind that actually harm us. So to learn to entrust ourselves in Buddhist psychology, to learn which types of mind to look out for in that they harm us, and which are the ones that we should look out for and develop further because they actually benefit us. So it's this process of getting to know yourself, looking inward, checking in every situation, what kind of mind is active right now? Don't identify with it. It's just a type of mind, just like this crowd of people in front of you. So there are these different minds that arise. But of course, then as part of the process of avoiding those that harm us, so resentment, jealousy, envy, arrogance, etc., not by suppressing them, but through skillful means, applying their antidotes as they're described. The antidote to envy, for instance, when we envy someone. Envy, I think it's an important one because in the 21st century, it is very strong. It's because of the competitiveness of the modern world. And there's nothing wrong with competitiveness in itself, just the wish to be better because someone else is. That's not envy. Envy is an exaggerated version of a healthy type of competitiveness where not only do you crave the success or whatever you wish, so it's a type of attachment, all right, but that's not even the harmful part. It's resenting the other person for having what you don't have. You don't want the other person to have that, so resentment comes in and you feel miserable, you're not happy when it arises. And it definitely becomes an obstacle to you reaching that which you actually envy the other person for. And it's just a very negative state of mind, which, because of the modern world, because of the competitiveness, we suffer from. And the best antidote is rejoicing. And there's something really funny about our mind. You can actually cheat your own mind. You fake it until you make it. When you feel envy to arise in your mind, well, you could try it out. Every mind, of course, is different, but you may be able to kind of tell yourself, I'm so happy for that person. May they have even more, to generate the wish and the aspiration to have even more of the thing you're envious of. And kind of like, I'm so happy for them. You generating this mind, like, I'm so happy for them that they have that. May they have more of that. And slowly you fake it until that mind actually grows stronger. And every time you catch yourself being envious, you just generate the mind, oh, maybe. And it gives you so much joy, and envy makes you so miserable that it's pretty easy after a while. We want to be joyful to generate that type of mind. Okay. So a bit of reasoning and so forth, why it makes sense to not be envious, of course, doesn't harm. It's definitely beneficial, but it's just one of those minds um, that you can actually kind of force it a little bit until you actually make it a habit. And of course, it's all about habits. It's all about habits. It's about growing more familiar. The more you do this, the more familiar you become. Okay, just do it again and again and again. Bring your mind back through mindfulness. I've mentioned it before. There are these three aspects. There's, first of all, introspection, to observe your own mind, your own actions of body, speech, and mind, and mainly the mind. Recollection, bringing the mind back to the object. When you forget, bring it back, bring it back. There's recollection, remembering. And then alertness, of course. You need the mental factor of alertness. So those three, when they're working together, just make sure you keep those all day long. They're like never far away from you. And always watching, always reminding yourself, what's my own mind doing? What am I thinking? What's happening? Not identifying, not judging. All right. But of course, most important, to make time for generating compassion, generating love, starting with ourselves, to be accepting of our shortcomings, of course, to feel it, to become your own best friend. The sense of being your own, being okay with yourself, being able to be alone with yourself. That's really important. To be your own best friend, in the sense that you can accept your faults, you can accept your mistakes. You know there's room for improvement, but it's okay. I make mistakes, I learn from my mistakes. I fail sometimes, I succeed sometimes, and to have more of a sense of equanimity. Okay, there'll be successes and there'll be failures. And the good thing about any failure is I can learn from my mistakes. So, therefore, first, to generate love in the sense of wishing myself to be happy, compassion, the wish for myself to be free from suffering, and of course, based on wisdom, how do I go about it? And there's a sense of acceptance, a sense of closeness. I'm okay. I'm not perfect. I don't need to be perfect. No one is perfect. So I'm all right with my mistakes, to forgive myself my mistakes and to move on. And then, of course, to generate that compassion, that sense of closeness and acceptance towards others. And you have to start with yourself. You can't have it for others. Well, to a certain degree, maybe sometimes, but not over a long time, not the kind of love and compassion we're talking about here. So first check, how hard are you on yourself? How often do you think, oh, I'm such an idiot, I'm such a failure, I'm a good for nothing? Oh, extremely harmful, these kinds of thoughts. So rather, okay, it's all right. There's room for improvement. I can improve. I have found methods. Buddhist psychology offers huge varieties of methods, and they work for anyone, whether you're from India, from Israel, whether you lived 2,000 years, 3,000 years ago, or whenever. Basic psychology, the basic psychology presented here, works in every situation. And you yourself have to make it work in each situation. You take the basic Buddhist principle and then you apply it to yourself and make it work for yourself. That's just part of the process. It's the same as when you eat food. You take the food and you digest it yourself. You make it part of your body, let go of the bits you don't need, and the rest will nourish you. Okay. So, but once you've started with yourself, of course, and again, I'm just fasting forwards. It's a whole process that takes time. But there's just no way around it. So, watch your own mind, to watch your own thoughts, be aware of them, look at the ones that are harmful, try to avoid them, or try to work with their antidotes. And then, of course, generate compassion and love for other sentient beings. So, either the wish for them to be free from suffering, then that's called compassion. So, a feeling of closeness towards another sentient being, and then the wish for them to be free from suffering, or the wish for them to be happy. They're just different states of mind because they're focused on different aspects. All right. And there is nothing, there's no other type of mind that can bring that sense of well-being. So if you truly have this wish for another person to be happy, as long as you can hold it, your own problems, your own difficulties, in that moment, they're not there. And you can actually experience a sense of peace. But it takes a while to really experience that and be able to kind of let go of my problem, this, my problem, that, etc. Our constant worries that we actually carry with us. And if we don't worry right now, worries, I would say, always around the corner. Okay, to do with me, to do with I, to do with mine, of course. But when you can generate this true care for other sentient beings, and I've mentioned it before, it's not a sense of being pulled down. Oh, I hear about the suffering of sentient beings. Oh my God, that's so depressing. My life sucks already. And then their life on top of the burden I have to carry my own life. So I'm taking on everyone else's burden. That's not compassion. That's just getting depressed about what's going on in the world. No, compassion, and one of my teachers has once explained this so beautifully. Compassion is about strength. It's about inner power. So understanding that suffering, like all the other things we experience, they're impermanent. They're not always there. They have their own causes and conditions. And if those causes and conditions are removed, suffering is removed. So with this attitude, in terms of understanding how suffering exists, that it's impermanent, that it arises from causes and conditions. So knowing that sentient beings will not always suffer. Every problem is constantly changing and slowly, of course, going out of existence for a new problem to arise. But it's not like there's a permanent suffering that cannot be removed. So with this understanding in the back of our mind, then the sense, I can do something. Right now, I have so many opportunities. I'm born a human being. And what's even more precious, because there's 7 billion human beings, right? I mean, it's not that, it's, you have more insects, you have more little animals, of course, but still 7 billion, that's not a bad amount. But how many people in this world are only interested in superficial rubbish? I mean, all day long, no interest in Buddhist psychology, in any system to transform your mind. Just no. Or if they have the interest, they like to hear about it for 2 minutes and then they get bored and I'd rather continue with their soap operas, whatever, right? Just basically only interested in superficial material gain. And so if you think about it, we are so lucky. We are some of the few people in this world, few humans in this world who show an interest in this. I mean, living here, being here in Germany, when it was my dad's birthday yesterday, I was just sitting there, I was like an alien, thinking what they're talking about. I'm so not interested. I don't care about which flowers grow in the garden or all these things. I'm just not. I mean, I listen to it to a certain degree, but it's not my whole life is invested in that. And if I had just brought up the Dharma, they would have all walked out. I'm pretty sure. I wouldn't dare to do that. But the point is, so few people really are interested in the Dharma. So we are so lucky to have these methods. They're just methods. Of course, it's up to us to apply them. And no one cares whether we have devotion or whatever. I mean, there's no Buddha telling us you better have devotion. No, it's good for us. Devotion is a positive state of mind that gives us peace of mind, and that's why it's positive. But even more important are love and compassion towards other sentient beings. And so there's so many methods, so many means to bring this about. And we're so fortunate to have that. So first of all, to give the sense like I can do something. I am so lucky. I'm so fortunate. I have thousands of opportunities. I'm human right now. I have a certain material comfort that gives me the time to do this, however short that time may be. So to become aware of that, to reflect on that, and get a sense, I'll do something no matter what. Bring it on, Corona or not, whatever is happening. I'll give my best. I give my whole energy. So it's very, very powerful. Anger, in fact, exhausts you. Yes, it can give you maybe a few seconds you have the strength to maybe beat someone up. But then, I mean, how long can you be full of anger and hatred? You'll be exhausted after an hour. Make a day of trying to be angry for hours and hours. You'll be more tired and exhausted in the evening. You can always tell if you have a lot of anger, a lot of and anger is not necessarily the one where you stop smiling. You may be burning inside. There's resentment inside. external expression are not always angry. Out of compassion, you can seem very wrathful, but that's not anger. It's what comes what's inside. So externally, even with compassion, you may go, this is enough. No, stop it. Okay. All right. So therefore, compassion is very powerful. It's very strong. It gives you a lot of strength. And if you look at someone like His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who is so full of power and energy, well, that's the energy that he gets from his incredible love and compassion. So therefore, to generate that wish for sentient beings to not suffer and to become aware that we all have the same basic mind. We have a mind that is clear and knowing. And therefore, we have all the same basis in the sense that that mind we can now utilize and become Buddhas. Everyone has that same mind, but our mind is right now is full of extra stuff. Our mind is full of extra stuff. Distraction, misapprehension of reality that leads to weird emotions, to fear, to worry, etc. So this is all because we have that basic mind, but it's loaded with all these other emotions, with these others, or these other states of mind that are not really in the nature of our mind that we can actually remove, but right now they're present, they're there. And all the other beings around us, they have that same beautiful mind, the ability to know all phenomena, how they actually exist, know reality, be loving, be compassionate. But because of their misapprehension of the self and their thereafter the attachment towards I and mine, they just can't help it. They just can't help it. They're driven. And they're so the stronger that sense of me is, the stronger they're self-grasping, the more miserable they are. Yeah. So often we resent these selfish people. They're so selfish. They're so this and that. But really, when you look a little closer, there's so much suffering. There's so much suffering. So therefore, if you reflect on this, on the nature of the mind, which is that clear nature, it's just none of the negative emotions are really in the nature of the mind, just as mud is not in the nature of water. You can separate when you have muddy water, however inseparable those seem. Well, we know from the way we get drinking water, you can actually separate the nature of water, the actual water, H2O, from what's in the water. And in the same mind, in the same way, all sentient beings have a mind like ours, and they can be removed. And they deserve to be happy. Everyone wants to be happy. We want to be happy. And it is because of other sentient beings that we have everything. That everything we know, we can use, we can utilize. The simplest thing. We were born naked, not knowing anything. And it was because of others and others and others and others who helped us, that we now got to where we are right now. So to really reflect on that every now and then, take the time to generate compassion. But a compassion and understanding, of course, is really understanding that not just the wish for others to be free from suffering. That's an amazing wish, and it's based on reality, because it is possible to remove sentient being sufferings, just as it's possible to remove our own. But on top of that, understanding that we can actually contribute to the removal of suffering of sentient beings if we first pull ourselves out of the mud to be then able to pull others out. And that is then the next step. So first, the wish for sentient beings to be free from their problems, their worries, etc., from their meaningless lives, from existing, having this incredible mind and not being able to utilize it at all, not being interested to utilize it at all, feeling that anger and compassion, so anger and attachment and envy, they're just natural and they should be there, and I don't care, I'm just do what I want. So those sentient beings, to generate the wish, not only may they be free from all this, from all that's extra, but I myself, may I be able to do something. So this is why we're doing all this. This is why Avalokiteshvara, no, Chenritna Shaiputra asked Avalokiteshvara, how should a son, okay, kind of just talking about the son first, how should a son of a lineage, how should someone who has generated that type of compassion, how should they practice? Okay, so very important. The wisdom we learn about based on compassion. So that's the first indication that the Heart Sutra does not just talk about wisdom and its object, that is emptiness, selflessness. No, it also talks about what do you need? What do you need in order for that wisdom to become effective? And it totally makes sense. The more compassion you generate, the more you train yourself in love and compassion, the more your mind moves away from I, on me, because your focus is more on others. And then it's much easier to realize, well, that self, that self-sufficient controller I that we analyzed over the last few weeks again and again, well, the easier it gets to understand it wasn't even there in the first place. So with love and compassion, you kind of let go of just me. Um, I've mentioned this before. One of my classmates, he's a Rinpoche from the Kagyu tradition. Once while we were debating, I asked him what was his view on why compassion helps our understanding of selflessness. And he said, well, when you have compassion, you get up from your chair, right? You get up from your chair of like me, just being obsessed with ourselves. You're actually reaching out towards others. And you realize there was no one in the chair in the first place. So when you generate love and compassion, you kind of, and then you turn around and you realize there wasn't anyone there in the first place. We feel like we're there sitting there with the self, but that self that we try to gratify has never been there. Our mind just imagines it. It just has this fantasy of this self and it imagines it. But of course, what's important, and I've mentioned it a little bit last time, again and again, to check there for the self. So to not totally let go of compassion, to make time for that, but then also to go back to what is this I? Last time I asked you in difficult situations to check the I, like throughout your day, but not just then. That's when it's very effective, but it's quite hard actually to always do that. Also, just sometimes when you walk up the stairs, where's the I that's walking? Where's the I that's eating, etc. Okay, so just to check up on the I. But again, to also go back to the method aspect, that is compassion and love. So basically, your day is divided into those two aspects. If you, and anyone can do that. If you're in a retreat setting, of course you do that anyway, well, depending on the retreat, but hopefully this is a great part of your retreat, should be of course part of your retreat. But then even when you go through your day and you do what you do, you have the time, you have the leisure. I mean, when you say automatic pilot, it's like you're so good at it. There's so many things you just do, they become second nature. You have plenty of time to do other things. So you have plenty of time to observe your own mind, watch the self, and make sure you refresh your love and compassion. You start off in the morning, and then throughout the day, it's like a thread. And you tap back into this. Oh, sentient beings. You see your neighbor. Oh, may this neighbor be enlightened. May they become fully enlightened. May they be happy. May they actualize their own potential. And then you see another person. You see someone on the news. I mean, there are plenty of opportunities. Even if you don't see anyone, you can think of them. So in that way, you bring in both method and wisdom into your daily life. But one thing that is quite interesting, especially with the self, and I've checked with one of the meditators that I've met, and I've asked this person, and this person has told me that other meditators have that problem, that sometimes the self-grasping, when you try to deal with it and you really make an effort, it can grow stronger. It may be because it's very strong there in the first place and you notice, but they say even it can also be that it grows stronger. It's almost like, you want to get rid of something and it's kicking and screaming. It doesn't want to go. So you may find yourself, you're really doing well, you're compassionate, you put someone else first, and it feels good for a few moments, and suddenly this really strong self-grasping comes through. And that shows the self-grasping mind, or that self-cherishing, self-centered mind should not be underestimated. Definitely don't try to suppress it. Don't try to suppress it. And also be prepared that you may have your moments when it goes really well, and then it may come back stronger. And then just, okay, note that it's stronger and apply the antidotes and just do it again, do it again. Just continue with becoming familiar with it. But of course, right now, and Geshe Thupten Pesangla, he said this once. He said, right now, where we are with our practice, and you could be somewhere else, I don't know, but I myself consider myself a total beginner. And some of you are beginners, and some of you may be advanced, I don't know. But the point is, if you're yourself, I like myself, a total beginner, right now, we are in a very bumpy road. Our Buddhist practice, he describes it like very bumpy. Like you're trying to do something and you can do it for 5 minutes and it feels good, but then you forget for the next 12 hours, right? Something else happens, you're busy, there's a holiday, the whole family, well, they don't arrive right now. So, well, maybe at least not as many as before. But the point is we forget, and it's so bumpy. There's so many bumps on the road. So right now, that's our situation. But what he says is, at some point, as you keep going, you reach the high road and the bumps disappear. Okay? So initially, when we start off to just get into that flow, it's difficult. Don't expect it any other way. You're not going to head towards or arrive at the highway unless you've done all the work in your last life. Okay, then that's different. But if we haven't done enough, and I know I haven't, so then we're like on a bicycle, an old bicycle, going through these potholes in some kind of jungle. That's how it feels. But you just keep going. Never mind, you reach the highway. Just every step. Sometimes it feels like you're going backwards. And then with the cycle, you go backwards like a kilometer, and then you go 2 meters forward, and you go, yeah, it feels that way. Probably that's probably what happens. But you just don't give up. As His Holiness the Dalai Lama says, don't give up. Just keep going. Never mind, there'll be obstacles, and slowly we can leave those behind. And then you get to the first level. And this is what I want to talk about. It took me a while to get there. But basically, and that's what's explained here, with the first part of Arya Avalokiteshvara's answer, in response to how someone who's now generated that great compassion, what happens after that? How does this continue? So implicitly, the explanation here, explicitly means literally the words he uses about emptiness here, emptiness there, no this, no that, and of course no inherently this, no inherently that. We'll talk about this again. Form is empty, emptiness is form. That's the explicit explanation. But there is also an implicit explanation as to what do you do with love and compassion? How do they develop? Do they actually develop? Of course they do. Of course they do. So once you generate great compassion, well, that great compassion has to be great compassion. We add the word great. Why? Because it's this spontaneous type of mind that when you trained it long enough and it has become great compassion, it arises spontaneously in that it is directed towards any sentient being, all sentient beings. So it said that all sentient beings, that no matter who there's a sense, I don't care about who they are, where they come from, whether they're human, animals, whatever, the sincere wish for them to be free from suffering. That's great compassion, directed towards all sentient beings. So that type of mind, when that type of mind arises, and it takes a long time for that to arise, it's not easy. You have to train yourself again and again and again and again. And then it arises for the first time, and you can hold it, I don't know, a minute, 5, okay? It may even be inspired by your Lama. That can happen. The Lama may inspire this in the presence of your Lama. As you know, for instance, this following weekend, on the 29th and the 30th, they changed the dates. His Holiness the Dalai Lama will give a 1,000 armed Avalokiteshvara empowerment. And then afterwards, a Singanada. This is the lion roar, Singanada, Avalokiteshvara lion roar, riding on a lion, just symbolic for compassion. It's a psychological Tantra is just a very profound psychological system where you work with the sense objects in order to generate these types of minds, such as compassion. So you may want to take the empowerment, you may just want to be present. And some of you may have heard, His Holiness has actually now said that if you can't be present, you watch the YouTube video afterwards. It's your motivation that counts. You can still receive the initiation. Okay. So anyway, that's just at the side. The point is that even maybe in the presence of His Holiness, when you, well, through Zoom or whatever the platform is they use, in that way, or YouTube, you can actually generate great compassion, be inspired, but it won't last. You'll lose that again once you're not in the presence of the Lama, and you have to work on it. And eventually you generate it. I mean, if the Buddha did it, we can all do it. There's really not such a huge difference. I mean, it seems huge. Yes, it is in one way, but in terms of having the same basics, same basic mind, well, there's no difference between the Buddha and ourselves. So therefore, we generate compassion, and that compassion has to grow stronger. It has to grow stronger until eventually we generate what's called bodhicitta, the wish to become enlightened, of course, driven by compassion. And even that has to become stronger. That becomes stronger and stronger and stronger. And now when you do your practice, what may be helpful, last time I mentioned the attitude of a beginner's mind. Okay, so to kind of every time you do something, you try to generate a sense of freshness. But also, every time you do your practice, to generate the wish, this will be the best practice I'm ever going to have. So not just to go, oh, my practice, just kind of read through it quickly, just to be over with it so you can put on the TV or do whatever you like doing. No, you generate this wish, this be the best. I'll give my everything. I'll give my everything for this practice. I'll do it better. So when we do the recite the prayer, I go for refuge to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Such a beautiful prayer. So easy, not difficult. We can easily memorize it. We can easily recite it. But every time you recite it, you give your everything. And next time you give a little bit more. Okay? So you just, that's how our practice should be. Not only do you familiarize yourself with certain states of mind, but you enhance them. They become stronger through familiarity, but also through your effort to strengthen them. So as I said, with compassion and bodhicitta, it's more obvious with the wisdom aspect. Yeah, your understanding gets deeper, you understand it even better, more aspects to it, and we get into this. You go deeper and deeper and deeper, yes. With wisdom, with a method, love and compassion, there's no need to go deeper into, I don't know, whatever you go deeper into. It's less of a sense of understanding deeper matters, because the mind that's compassionate, that is loving, it's not a mind that knows things in itself. It is supported by knowledge, needs to be supported, needs to be influenced by an understanding of impermanence and emptiness and so forth. So the better your understanding in that area, the stronger your love and compassion. But they're, strictly speaking, different functioning minds. So compassion and love are aspiring. They wish for something. They wish, and they're more than that, but it's like the wish for someone to be happy, the wish to become enlightened for the benefit of all sentient beings. And wish is a weak word. It doesn't really, so you use the word aspiring, to strongly wish to be enlightened for the benefit of sentient beings. You don't care about yourself, it's other sentient beings, and that's bodhicitta. You want to remove whatever's extra in your mind for the benefit of sentient beings. That's why you want it. You want to become a Buddha, because in that way you'll be so effective to help others, more effective than in any other situation. And we can be Buddhas, we all can. The Buddha became enlightened. If he can do it, we can all do it. Based on that understanding, of course, and based on understanding that things are not solid, unchanging. No, they're not. They're changing all the time. So, but as I said, here it starts off with at least mentioning great compassion implicitly by asking a son of the lineage, how should they practice? How should they practice wisdom? And in answer to that, Avalokiteshvara says, a son or daughter, basically implying anyone, right? Not just male, female, anyone can do this. So anyone can practice this. And basically when he says Shariputra, any son or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this, etc. Basically implicit in these words is the first level that's called the path of accumulation. So before you become a Buddha, Buddhahood is the 5th level. There are 4 other levels. It's not that much really, right? I mean, Buddhahood is difficult enough, but the good news is you only have 4 levels. It's not like 8 million levels, although to a certain degree, many sub-levels, of course. But really, there are these 4 levels. And it helps us to understand these levels because once we've understood them, we know what direction we're going. We don't always have to ask, should I meditate like this? Should I meditate like that? Okay. So with a better understanding, where's our mind going? In other words, how do we transform our mind? We can make decisions. We become more independent, if you like. Geshe the Kelsang has once said that. What is the need for study? And he said, you become more independent. In the sense, he said, to do your practice, when you do your practice, when you have a knowledge of how the mind works, where you're taking your mind, basically, if you have that knowledge, you know, oh, when an obstacle arises, how do I deal with it? Well, this is where I want to go. So this is how probably I'll deal with this. Okay, so you don't need to always ask your teacher about it. Of course, if you can and you have a question, you cannot solve it. But closeness to your teacher doesn't mean you always run there to ask questions. It's a mental closeness, a feeling of being inspired, and to generate the wish to be mentally close to them, not physically, not necessarily having to ask questions. So, therefore, understanding the first level, it's called a path because it takes you somewhere, is called the path of accumulation. You accumulate everything that is necessary to now move on. And accumulation, well, the first level, path of accumulation, basically you enter that level once you have bodhicitta. Once you have bodhicitta, that's when you enter that. But bodhicitta, that mind, the wish to become enlightened for all sentient beings, driven, of course, by love and compassion, like deep care. You care for sentient beings even more than you care for your own children. Okay, I don't have children, so I don't know that care, but I see incredible love and compassion that parents have for their children. And it's said that love, that care, that compassion, that self-sacrifice, if necessary, is even greater. The love and compassion of someone who wants to become enlightened, because you don't just want to give your children ordinary happiness, you want to give your children full enlightenment, and not just your children, everyone's children. So that is the driving force, and you can't just have that and move further without wisdom. You need those two, both. You need both. They're described like the wings of a bird. You know, you need both of them together. And to not neglect, of course, love, compassion, but also not to neglect wisdom. And so basically he says first is this first level. So once you have bodhicitta, once you generated that mind, maybe you've understood emptiness before that or selflessness before that. But if you haven't, this is the time to get down to it. You can't move from that level. You can't enhance your understanding unless you generate an understanding of emptiness. And this is where this comes in. So this is how it makes sense. He talks first about the path of accumulation. In some commentaries, it says that both accumulation and preparation. Some would say that's the second level. So you have the path of accumulation, first level. That is when Shariputra asked in response to Shariputra's question. Avalokiteshvara kind of says very, very general fashion, you should repeatedly behold those 5 aggregates as empty of inherent existence. And then thereafter, more specifically, now you prepare. It's the path of preparation, where you take your understanding of emptiness, and the emptiness remains the same. So once you understand it, I'll go back to explaining it, but just to understand how you deal with the mind that has understood emptiness. Because the thing is, our mind right now is extremely distracted. So think you yourself may actually have understood the self doesn't exist the way it appears, or the body doesn't exist. There's no intrinsic body. It's merely labeled. You may understand that. That's incredible. But it's only the beginning. So much work to be done. Why? Because how great is our attention span? How long can you stick with emptiness? Right? A few moments, and then something else comes. We can't stick with it. Our mind is too distracted. So we think about it a little bit, it has some effect, but then our daily life comes in, and it becomes difficult. Now, this part now, in order to move to the second level, that's really difficult. That's actually really difficult. So to just live your daily life as usual, it becomes a little harder. That's when you really want to make some time to do specific meditative practices such that, well, yeah, you're very focused, you'll do a retreat. Again, whether you're a layperson or not, anyone can do it. If you just make the time and you have the interest. So what do you need to do now? You need to get shamatha. Now you need to get shamatha. There's no way around it. You need to be able to generate a state of concentration such that you can concentrate with deep clarity, and at the same time being able to stay with the same object with clarity and abidance, being able to stay with the same object for at least 4 hours. Very difficult, but very rewarding. I mean, who wouldn't want a little bit more of it? Has so many good qualities, but besides the whole Buddhist path kind of idea. So to develop shamatha. Why do you want to be so focused? Well, then next time you think of emptiness, you bring it together with this concentration. And we don't need to go into how you develop that. A lot of explanation is given. But think, if you can understand emptiness, yeah, it depends on reasoning. It's still kind of hazy. You've understood it intellectually. But with this powerful tool of focusing, being able to focus on the same object. So you look for the eye and you don't find it. Oh my God, I can't find the eye, right? You do the meditation. The meditation is about searching for where could it be, where could it be, where could it be, until you basically arrive at a negative, not finding it. Okay, that's the first step. You haven't realized emptiness yet. That's what Geshe says. Some would say the non-findability of an inherent I, that means you've found emptiness. That's how it's put forward. But really, you need to thereafter understand how the I, or that the I is merely labeled. Once you've done that there's a conventional I that does exist, but there's no inherent I, when you've brought those two together, that's when you've understood emptiness. So, but the understanding of emptiness, having previously understood how the self does exist, the conventional self exists, that mere non-findability, that mere negative that appears to your mind, just not findable, not there, that's emptiness. Okay. And people ask, like, how do I know I've found it? Sometimes people ask this. Sometimes when I translate, they ask a lama, how do I know I didn't realize emptiness? No, it's a valid question. I'm just laughing because sometimes it's like someone who's just meditated for 5 weeks and they ask already, well, have I now? And anyone who's done some Buddhist practice know 5 weeks usually, unless you have strong imprints, strong from what you've done previously in a previous life. You don't necessarily get there so quickly. But there's definitely a huge change. That's how the scriptures talk about it. You'll realize, you'll find that your emotions are not as wild and not as uncontrolled, just understanding that. But that's just the beginning. As I said, you now need to take that understanding and bring it together with concentration. Bring it to concentration to such a degree that your understanding of emptiness is now combined with a deep sense of concentration, a deep state where your mind is totally focused. So you can stay with emptiness without getting bored, just remaining focused on that. And once you can bring those two together, shamatha, together with your understanding of emptiness, vipassana, your special insight, shamatha and vipassana, you bring the two together. And here, vipassana, the word is used a little different than in other traditions. It means specifically your understanding of the absence of an inherent I. When you bring this and shamatha, this very stable mind together, you reach the second level. You reach the second level of the path to enlightenment. So this is now called the path of preparation, where you conceptually, it's not as clear. It's not such a clear realization, clear in the sense that the object doesn't as clearly appear as the objects around you, colors, shapes, etc. But nonetheless, you understood it. You realize it. So it's like when you have a memory versus perceiving. You have your memory of an apple and perceiving the apple itself. You see the quality in the perception when you can remember seeing the apple, but it's never as clear as seeing the apple itself. So that's the difference between conceptually understanding emptiness, and that's the initial understanding you have, versus directly experiencing it. We're not there yet. On the path of accumulation and the path of preparation, you don't have that direct experience of emptiness yet. But you're very focused on the apple, extremely. You can stay with the apple for 4 hours. An apple here, of course, I mean emptiness. Okay. So, you see from what you've learned today, it's not just about understanding emptiness. That's reaching the highway, kind of, I guess. It's still in the beginning. And it just takes a little while. We got a few bumpy roads ahead of us to actually get there. Once you're there, things are much easier. So they say. They promise us, right? So there's 2 steps forward, 5 backwards. No, it's not happening. You're so driven, you're so motivated. People don't notice that. They don't necessarily notice that. That's why we could have these incredible practitioners among ourselves, but they're not the ones saying, hey, look at me, I'm a great meditator. They don't care what other people think. This is an example I can think of. Our director at the IBD, Geshe, he passed away not so long ago, a few years ago now. Not the one who got killed in the 90s. No, another one. He had a very dear disciple from Zanskar. He was always a little dirty, like his clothes were not very fancy, not clean. He looked always like wearing like hand-me-down kind of robes. And he seemed a little, I'm embarrassed to say, simple-minded and stupid. I mean, not stupid, but people didn't take him seriously, including myself, kind of thinking, he's not very well educated. And he was so humble that you kind of like, I caught myself kind of looking down on him, thinking, he doesn't really, like these hotshot geshes and stuff, like, whoa. But he wasn't one of them at all. He was so humble and he didn't care. People treated him with a certain degree of, like, not obviously to his face, but I could see my own mind going, it's just this simple monk, I mean, I wasn't inspired. I wasn't impressed or anything. And he just didn't care. And when he'd passed away, he was in the clear light for 15 days. And I remember talking to these other nuns and we're like, oh my gosh, such a true, he didn't care about name. He didn't care how other people looked at him. He was always kind. He was always friendly. Wow. And I for me, it was again, wow, that's a true practitioner. Doesn't care. It just does his thing. He was just doing his thing. And outwardly, he wasn't doing anything. He was just a monk in some dirty robes. So those are the true practitioners. He was truly practicing and he couldn't care. He was just doing his thing. He didn't care what others thought. And he was very devoted to our director. So inspiring. So it's the quiet people oftentimes that are the real practitioners, I believe. I mean, of course, there's some incredible lamas who are not that quiet, but they're long on the highway. But for someone to go from that bumpy road to the highway, they're not necessarily in the limelight. And yeah, anyway, but we know ourselves, of course, best. Is my name important? Is it important for people to see me, to know me, etc.? It's all part of it. But to return to the actual emptiness, we're interested here. So all this is based on a deep love and compassion for sentient beings. But now, if I want to develop this mind that in combination with shamatha becomes a very powerful tool to now remove what's extra in my mind, well, I need to understand emptiness. And that takes me back to the explicit meaning of this sutra. Okay, so today I've taken a bit of a detour. Instead of going right into emptiness, I did mention the implicit part, love and compassion. And I want you for this week to practice specifically also the implicit aspect, to every now and then, of course, well, recite the Heart Sutra, that's important, but also pay attention to the hints where son or daughter of the lineage, that means someone who's generated great compassion. And then, of course, also the first part of the answer, Shariputra, any son or daughter of the lineage, to become aware that's the first level, the path of accumulation, where you're bringing everything together, you're generating all that's necessary to move on to the next level, where your understanding of emptiness is now made more powerful, not because of the object that you understand, no, because you can stay with that mind, you can generate the mind and be totally focused on emptiness for an extended period of time, maybe even 4 hours. How that is important, we'll get to this, but just know that. So this is the part here. Path of accumulation is explained, where you train yourself in that concentration, not while you're thinking of emptiness. You can't. You can bring the two together later on, once you move to the second level, called the path of preparation. But before you can do that, you need to practice them separately. Sometimes practice shamatha, sometimes practice wisdom, and of course, still method, also not to be ignored. Okay? So this is like you have your whole package of practice here together. Love, compassion, and of course, the wish to become enlightened for all sentient beings on one hand. Then wisdom on the other hand. And wisdom means, again, go back into emptiness, think about the self, to deepen this further and further, to become more familiar with it, to deepen your understanding, but to also bring in shamatha, if you haven't done that before. And practice, train yourself in shamatha, also very important. So those three aspects, just to keep it simple. There's a little more to it, but we don't have the time to go into all this. But that's also implicitly, that's also implied in those words. And now to go back to emptiness. And I remember Varda, I'm not sure, I see only a few people in front of me, so right now I don't see Varda, she may be here, but if not, the question she asked is still important, very important. She asked about how does the labeling take place? What is the referent object when we say label or designate, okay? Versus the self doesn't exist to take the self or to take the body, okay, or body part or the mind, as we will do as we go along. First of all, we look for some essential, in the case of I, an essential I. Okay, why are we looking for it? Because that's how it appears to the mind. there appears to be some essence here that makes me the I and you, basically. All right. So when you look for that, you just cannot find it. That essential, that in and of itself existing self, something there, okay, that makes me and you, that cannot be found. You always find things other than that. You find mind and body, but you're not looking for mind. You're actually looking for that self, this essential, what's I. So you cannot find that. But then, as I said, not being able to find it, that itself is not enough. Now you need to understand that nonetheless the I exists. We're not saying, although I cannot find something solidly there, that it's that I, conventionally, the I exists. And that brings me to labeling, designating. I'm pretty sure you have a good word in Hebrew, or maybe if it's not that good, you kind of get a sense of what we're actually talking about. Labeling in the sense of, when I hear label, like even like on a bottle, you have like a label, right? So we think of it as in that way, as like applying a bottle, like a name tag to something. That has something, we're getting there, but that's not really what is meant. That's not yet what's meant with it. Then we may have a sense of, Bada is there. Yeah, I can see something down there. So then we have not applying an actual physical label as such, but giving something a name, like a word, applying a term. So when you learn language, for instance, so this is called a table. So for the first time, you see an object and you learn that this is called a table. And every time you see a similar object, you designate it. You go, oh, you actually literally say, oh, a table. Okay, literally means verbally. You actually verbally say label. So remember, the first example is you apply a physical label. You actually kind of apply a label to a bottle of wine or whatever, give it a name. That's one way of looking at it. The second would be to verbally apply a name. All those are not the labeling we're talking about. There are a type of labeling, but there's even more to labeling. Because so far we've talked about a physical labeling, like literally putting a label on a bottle, or a verbal labeling, kind of using a word to refer to something. Okay, so verbal and physical. The actual labeling is mental. Like everything in Buddhism, really. I mean, whether an action is positive or negative depends on the state of mind. Pulling someone's tooth could be negative and could be positive, depends on the motivation. So here we're not talking about motivation in terms of labeling. We're talking about a process, a mental process that is described as labeling. It's a mental process called labeling. So it's not applying the word. It's not even that. That's very coarse. Okay. What it is thinking table. That's it. Thinking, the thought, when you have the thought. I'm not talking about an eye consciousness just perceiving the shape and color of the table, okay? Or your body consciousness touching the table and feeling the structure of the table, okay? Those are sense consciousnesses. No, I'm talking about what is called mental consciousness, the consciousness that you always have while you're sleeping at all times. It's there. It's called a mental consciousness. It's not the sense consciousness. It's the constant narrator, the one that's always talking, always thinking. That's the thinking mind. It's called a thought consciousness or a conceptual consciousness. That's the kind of technical term. So every time you think chair, table, this person, nice guy, nutnik, you're labeling. Every thought you think, now you're doing serious labeling. Serious labeling. Even when you're meditating. even when you're meditating well, I mean, shamatha, when you're focusing on the breath and you actually focus on the breath with each moment, because what is meditating is not the sense consciousness. You need the sense consciousness to meditate on the breath. You need the body consciousness. It's your body consciousness that noticing the movement of the breath, either at your throat and your nose or at your belly, whichever your point of focus. So the body consciousness notices that, and whatever the body consciousness notices, your conceptual, your thought consciousness is now focusing on it. And if you can, for 4 hours, focusing on breathing, you're labeling, basically. You're labeling that. And there's nothing wrong with labeling. Labeling is good. Every time you think breathing in, breathing out, you're labeling. So, in answer to hopefully Varda's question, I hope I can answer that question. What actually happens? So let's take the simple example. Let me take something that's pretty simple. Okay, I've got a bottle here, some medicine, okay? Now, it's got a lid, it's got a few parts to it, but I can take two. There's this bottle and there's its lid. And then there's this little thing here, this kind of framey thing that keeps it all together. And there's a label, there's the glass, so a few parts. None of those are a bottle. And there's nothing in this object or from the side, from the aspect of this object that makes it a bottle. Nothing. It doesn't have bottle written on it or anything bizarre. There's no bottleness to be found here. There's only my thought consciousness when it sees these parts performing a certain function based on the way it's put together, okay, the lid and everything, the way it's put together. So based on that, when I put this together and the function it performs, I have the thought, whatever I call it, bottle, medicine bottle, okay? So that in that way I've labeled. I've had the thought bottle. And if this was a car, okay, if this was a car, certain parts that are structured together, put together in a specific way, enabling this object to perform a function. Now I have the thought car. Okay, whether I use the word car or I use some other symbolic that, if you haven't learned language yet, there's a way in which you can refer to an object, maybe just something visual comes to mind, just something that comes to mind that resembles this object. That which resembles that object, let's use the word, when we use language, of course, it's easier to share what's happening here because we just use that word. So I'm actually thinking bottle, or I'm thinking car. That is the label, the car here, that is the object of my conceptual mind, which is applied to this object here. Okay? So every time I'm thinking based on these parts, I'm thinking bottle. Can I find this bottle? If I were to remove that label, okay, say in my case, I use the word label. In Hebrew, you have bottle. In Hebrew, you have your own word, and another living being that doesn't know language has another symbolism that it uses, uses every time it thinks about this object, something that it has created, if you like, based on this function. And it's pretty consistent with that. It's consistent. It doesn't call this cow one day, dragon the next, and then bottle on the third day. No, there's a consistency to it based on certain aspects. It depends on the aspects, on the functions. And that is the mind thinks bottle. Now, taking myself, there is a mind and there's a body, the 5 aggregates. Okay, 5 aggregates will be mentioned in a little bit. So, to make it short, body and mind. And of course, there are many, many body parts that do different things. There are many minds, many different minds that do different things. And every now and then, when a mind thinks a thought, when a mind gets angry, or a mind is compassionate, or the body does something, my
thought consciousness, which is also a type of mind, labels I. Okay, I think. What is it? What is the referent object while I'm saying I think? It's a thinking mind, a certain type of mind that's thinking. Now the labeling mind, and there's just a short moment in between. Thinking, I, label. That's it. So the I, the I which I label this upon is really just the thinking mind. Or when there's the angry mind, okay, there's a short moment where I label, oh, I'm angry. Okay, or my hand is twitching. Okay, I'm saying, oh, I'm twitching. I cannot sit still. I'm just labeling, but there is no I that's doing that twitching. It's just labeled on the basis of a certain part doing it. That's it. But that's not how it feels. To me, it feels like, no. There's not just a hand twitching and there's just a thought. There's a whole big I. And that I is really important. There's this big I. There's this I that owns this mind and this body, and it's important. This is very important. And it's more important than you are. And because the mind, it's my own mind that makes up that I. And since the mind naturally wants to be happy, the mind that makes up this inherent I, it's a type of mind of the many ones. And it's not always there. It pops up every now and then, but it has a strong influence on all the other minds. That mind now gives rise to a mind that believes my own happiness is more important. All based off a fantasy of some kind of I that's not just labeled based on what my arm does, what the mind does. No, it seems to be something separate there. That once after I've labeled, there is a sense it is an I, and therefore I called it that, instead of it's only an I because I had the thought I. That's it. And of course, it's not like we think only I. We have a whole sense of identity, which is important initially to have that before you can deny it. I'm like this. So someone is kind to me and they tell me, they praise me. I'm thinking I have this good quality. So I have it. I keep labeling. I keep adding to it. I keep looking at, my mind keeps looking at, and here I'm labeling actually it's my mind doing it. My mind is looking at me and then the rest of the world, and keeps all the time. I keep comparing myself all the time. I'm keeping up my labeling, continue. I'm like this, I'm like that. And if you've ever been in a situation where you don't see anyone all day long, there's a sense you're losing yourself because there's no one there to, like, the interaction with the other person to allow you to think, oh, in comparison to them, I'm like this, to continue this labeling. Okay? There's a sense like I have to have this thought, I'm losing myself. Actually, no, you just have this urge to label, to keep that labeling, to remain with this illusion the self is there. And it's scary when you first don't find it. That fear is a good kind of fear, right? People say when they kind of get it initially, they're like, oh, that's so scary because everything has been about the I. I'm unemployed. What are you saying? My whole life loses its meaning because it's all been about me. And you're telling me it's not there? That's the first reaction. Okay, all right. So I hope I've answered this to a certain degree. Okay, now to summarize a little bit of what I've talked about today, emptiness is important, but we also need love and compassion. We need to have love and compassion for ourselves and for all sentient beings. That's what's really important in life. Nothing else is important. I may just say that, but if you investigate, to really feel good, to be healthy, mainly, of course, psychologically, but then in the long term, of course, also affecting our body, is to have compassion and love for other sentient beings, for ourselves, of course, included. But that's not enough. It's good for a while and it can keep us, but it's our misapprehension of reality that keeps us from being always compassionate. So this misapprehension, its long tentacles can catch us back and weaken our compassion, which is why we need compassion to strengthen our wisdom, but let's not ignore wisdom. So that's the focus of this text here. Understanding, for instance, how the I exists, how the body exists. But we started off with the I. It's merely labeled on the basis of parts that are not the I. And the labeling process, as I mentioned, is just thinking the thought I. A consciousness that takes mind or body, sometimes both, sometimes on specific mind, and has the thought I. That's a labeling mind based on one of the five aggregates, one of the different minds, or one of the different aspects of the body. Okay, so every moment you have that thought I, you're labeling. Okay, now the referent object is some aspect, some part of the body based on which you say I, and you have the thought I. That's it, that's the labeling. It's not that complicated. All right. Okay, and if you look for that I, cannot find anything because it's just labeled. And then if you look for the body based on which you've labeled, can't find a body, just find parts other than that, which you've also labeled on. We keep thinking, my body, my body, my body, right? We keep doing that. So all these thoughts we have, we keep labeling, we keep make sense of the world, but it's a labeling process that comes from our own mind. It doesn't come from the side of the object, because the object lacks that existence from its own side. But even the mind itself, that's labeling, when you take that apart, that is also merely labeled. And we get to that when we talk about feeling next time. Okay. All right. I can see it. We don't have that much time. It's always just an hour and a half and it's over in no time. But hopefully I've given you a sense of both aspects, compassion and wisdom, and specifically the labeling. And I'd like to do a meditation now. We've got about 15 minutes left. I'm going a little bit over time. If you need to leave, of course you can do so. I won't even notice. So please do. But for those of you who are interested in meditating on what we did today, so please bear with me. And we didn't do this in the beginning, but we start with some breathing, just to ease into the analytical meditation. So now let's start with generating a deep sense of acceptance and love for ourselves. To think that despite our shortcomings, we have this pure nature of our mind, which can transform into the mind of a Buddha. Therefore, generate the feeling of love and compassion for yourself. Wish to be free from suffering. The wish to be happy.
Really feel that love and acceptance for your mind and your body, that is for yourself. And now extend it towards other sentient beings. To think that the nature of our mind is the same as that of a Buddha, as of all other sentient beings. And just as we have problems and worries, etc., because of our basic misapprehension of reality, so do all other sentient beings. They can't help being selfish because of that basic wrong view. So now generate the wish, all other sentient beings, to be free from all their problems and the causes of those problems. Sense of closeness and a sincere wish for them to be happy and therefore to be free from all their problems. And the good news is that wishing for others to be free from suffering, that wishful thinking can actually be brought into reality if we ourselves become a fully awakened Buddha. Removing all our misapprehensions and now being able to teach others how to do the same. Which is why, based on our deep love and compassion for others, let's generate the wish to become fully enlightened. For the welfare of other sentient beings, and thereby enter the path of accumulation. So, based on this love and this compassion we've just generated, and of course, the wish to become enlightened, we now need to meditate on emptiness. Starting off with looking for the I, for the sense of something within our mind and body that is the I, that owns the mind, that owns our body. That wants to be liked, be praised, experience pleasure. But when you look for that I among your mind and your body, you won't find anything that can be called that I. Nothing intrinsic that is more than just thinking I. Based on what the mind does or the body does. Therefore, every time there's anger, we label, I'm angry. When the I consciousness sees a tree, the thought consciousness labels, I see a tree. When certain body parts are involved in waving at someone, the thought consciousness labels, I wave. So the I exists only conventionally. as the object of the thought consciousness. Which means we are free. Free from having to look after an imagined I. And free to transform our mind for the welfare of all sentient beings. And now, in conclusion to this analytical meditation, whatever conclusion you've come to, focus on that for a few moments and allow this to sink deeper into your own mind. All right. So gently come out of your meditation. And now it's quite important, of course, that you don't just do what we've done now, only this one time, but also to go back to this throughout the week, to take whatever you understood. There may be different levels, of course, depending on how much you've learned about this, how much you've meditated, but to take whatever you've learned and to not just intellectually think about it, but also take a moment to take it to a deeper level the way we just did, okay, in the form of a meditation. And again, it's part of reciting the Heart Sutra. Once at least. Okay, great. So then let's do the dedication, whatever positive potential we have accumulated here together as a group. May, of course, this become a cause for us to transform our mind, to generate greater love and compassion, better understanding of ourselves and others, in order to fully awaken and to truly make a difference in this world through our example and through our teachings. All right. And then let's recite the dedication prayer. Great. May all beings everywhere, plagued by sufferings of body and mind, obtain an ocean of happiness and joy by virtue of my merits. May no living creature suffer, commit evil, or ever fall ill. May no one be afraid or belittled with a mind weighed down by depression. May the blind see forms and the deaf hear sounds. May those whose bodies are worn with toil be restored on finding repose. May the naked find clothing, the hungry find food. May the thirsty find water and delicious drinks. May the poor find wealth, those weak with sorrow find joy. May the hopeless find hope, constant happiness and prosperity. May there be timely rains and bountiful harvests. May all the medicines be effective and wholesome prayers bear fruit. May all who are sick and ill quickly be freed from their ailments. Whatever diseases there are in the world, may they never occur again. May the frightened cease to be afraid, and those bound be freed. May the powerless find power, and the people think of benefiting each other. For as long as space remains, for as long as sentient beings remain, until then may I too remain and remove the sufferings of sentient beings. All right. Well, thank you very much. And keep
Thank you.
practicing, keep doing the Heart Sutra and the meditations, and we'll continue next week. Have a good week.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you very much.